Makes me wonder, how did Victorians get panicked into accepting lockdowns that were so insane that you couldn't even go to a beach at one stage? You couldn't go fishing. Children's playgrounds shut down. So I was struck by a very good speech in Parliament the other day that helps to explain why we accepted this stupidity, why we accepted with the pandemic, and why we're increasingly accepting really absurd punishment to placate the global warming believers. That speech was by Liberal Senator Alex Antic.
Tyranny descends under the cloak of emergency and the promise of safety. Emergency is the language that you use when democracy is no longer working for you.
You can hear the rest of it on his Facebook page, or you can just settle back because Senator Alex Antic joins me now. Senator Antic, thank you so much for joining me. The pandemic emergency was used to force on us terrible lockdowns in Melbourne, 252 days in all, at a terrible price. We've also had a supposed climate emergency, so, you know, that's the excuse for more restrictions, again at a terrible cost. What do you think's going on here?
Well, thanks for having me on, Andrew. Look, I think what we're seeing is a pattern developing now, and I think we're going to see that pattern continue to emerge. You know, I mean, to a little bit of a history lesson. Back in ancient Rome, dictators and generals used to use this ruse as a way of bricking in laws that otherwise people wouldn't accept. You know, you'd see times of war, the generals would simply sweep laws through, and they'd become bricked in, if you like. And we've seen a little bit of that through the COVID period. This use of fear is so powerful, and calling it an emergency means that there's an opportunity there for politicians and bureaucracies to sweep and through and grab power and not release it. We know what happens. Bureaucracies get power and then they put pressure on politically for it not to be released. We saw that with COVID. Many of those laws now are bricked in, I think, in Victoria and in South Australia. They're now there for good, things that didn't exist pre-April 2020. But of course, this language of the climate emergency is now being used as well to weaponise climate laws. It happened in South Australia. The state Labor government there several months ago declared a climate emergency with no particular proof. And we're now seeing these laws roll out. So I think this is a continuing pattern, and I think it's something that Australians need to be really, really conscious of, because, you know, people do strange things when they're frightened or when they're being frightened unnecessarily.
It's so true. I mean, you have a look, you know, the constant references now to extreme weather. You just need a normal storm and it's extreme weather. The Bureau of Meteorology even adding new colours, making its weather maps look even scarier and hotter. Now, you know, you talk about the climate wars. I mean, the way Labor's using this climate wars, we've got to end them like there's a war going on. The reconciliation movement is based on a supposition that we're also having a race war. I mean, the language of extreme, this extremity is just over the top. I think we're being conditioned to feel fear.
Yeah, look, I think we are too. And I say often to people who may not have made that connection yet, you will start to understand when you go to the supermarket and you're not allowed to buy, you know, another steak for the barbecue, or you go to the petrol station and you can't fill up your tank with petrol because it's a climate emergency, there's been laws passed and you're being tracked and watched. So I don't think this is far-fetched anymore. I think we're starting to see that language emerge. You're quite right about the maps. We've seen that all through the UK, these burning landscapes. And of course, this climate bill has passed the lower house and, you know, it'll come to the Senate soon. And if it passes, what we can expect there is more green lawfare and the ability for Parliament to simply raise those emission targets at the swipe of a pen without coming back to Parliament. We are seeing the rise of the bureaucratic rule through emergency direction.
I fear that's absolutely correct. And I think it's also being used to make us make any sacrifice that if we just, you know, were calm about it, we'd think was ludicrous. How, for instance, are we in a country where we've got mountains of coal, lakes of oil, oceans of gas, and the poor in this country can't afford to heat their homes this winter because we're so short of electricity and gas, the price has gone through the roof? You'd only accept that if you really did have the language of war and emergency.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. And that's been the MO on this. And we're seeing it, wherever there's solar and wind, the prices rise. And yet around the Asia Pacific region, we're seeing a very different story with China putting in, something like 300 new coal-fired power stations. All of that new coal power is being generated in those countries, India, China, Vietnam, and others. And here, when we see low emissions, we see low manufacturing, we see high prices. Look, it is a scandal in my view that we are in the land of coal, gas, and of course uranium. Let's not forget uranium, and yet our power prices are so high. This is ultimately something that Australians are going to have to learn the hard way. I mean, Australians ultimately now have a Labor government, Labor-Greens alliance, and we've seen what happens. The Greens have tipped in and made this climate bill, in my view, even worse. And I fear Australians are going to have to learn the lesson the hard way.
Yes, but I think the only way to start tackling it is to start fighting against this rhetoric of fear and extremism. I mean, we just see, the whole Great Barrier Reef scare campaign collapse, record coral cover after 2 decades of being told emergency is dying. We've really got to push back on this. Senator Alex Antic, thank you so much. I think you're doing your bit. Wish more of your colleagues were, because dare I say, this is an emergency. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.